Okay, our next speaker is Jeffrey Merrick, who remembers his first Western Society of French History meeting 40 years ago in Eugene, in no small part because a graduate school friend tried to teach him how to drive stick shift on the twisting coastal highway from San Francisco to Oregon. After 22 years at the University of Wisconsin-Milwaukee, he retired to Southwest Florida, where the sun shines almost every day, where he spends time almost every day in his study, also known as the Article Factory, reading and writing about suicide, domestic violence, and same-sex relations under the Ancien Regime. Now, I could list a whole bunch of articles by Jeff, but what I would like to bring to your attention, in case you don't know it, is this extraordinary session that was held in 2013 at the Society for French Historical Studies called The 18th Century According to Jeffrey Merrick. And then there was an A-Trance Salon, which was very, very wonderful, and there is, you can YouTube this, and our own Victoria was the interviewer of Jeff, who had a little challenge with the microphone, but was otherwise quite brilliant. So Jeff's done a ton of stuff. Many of you are familiar, I'm sure, with the co-edited volume he did with Tip Reagan on homosexuality in modern France. And his paper today is called, oh, I'm sorry, one more very important thing. Penn State is about to publish his next book, which is called Sodomites, Pederasts, and Tribades in 18th Century France, a Documentary History, and that's coming out in the spring. So his talk is called Prosecution and Toleration of Sodomy in 18th Century France. Jeff.
Since I had trouble with that microphone, you won't be surprised that I don't have a graphic for what I'm about to ask you to do. I'd like you to imagine a pyramid with a very broad base that runs in rather steeply toward the point. A pyramid with 7 layers in it. At the bottom, the first layer would be all the men who desired men or had sex with men in 18th century Paris. Of course, we don't know and cannot know who they all are. We only know what our extant sources will tell us. So we move to the second layer, which would be all the known sodomites in 18th century Paris. These would be men who were captured by the police or men who were mentioned by other men who were captured by the police. In the moral series that Michel Rey used in his articles published in the 1980s and 90s, and another series that Rey did not know about or use, especially the Prisoners series in the archives of the Bastille. Research in this latter series shows that we have to review and revise everything that Michel Rey had to say about the sodomitical subculture, from the basic demographic issues like age, rank, and role, to the more abstract questions about mentalities, identities, and community. Stephen Shapiro in the back there, and I, and Tip, and others are involved in a digital humanities project to construct a database of all of these men. And by the time we're done, I think we'll have 10,000 records. In the third level would be the men who were actually arrested by the police in public spaces where men sought sex with other men, as opposed to private places off stage. And there are actually many, many more men there than in the first category. And we compile those records mostly from the records of arrests, men who mention other men. A lot of these men were released on the spot, men with titles or with money or first-time offenders. So we move to the next level, would be men who actually did time in prison. Now at this point, we move from cases handled administratively to the police to cases handled judicially by the courts. Some men who were arrested, who were imprisoned, were referred by the police for prosecution by the Châtelet, the municipal court. Trying to find them is not an easy task. There is an inventory of Châtelet cases, an incomplete inventory, but there is no column for what the offense is. So the only way to find your way through that series is to get references from the police records about arrests and look for those individuals whom you've located. Or you can work backward from the cases that actually ended up in the hands of the Parliament on appeal. That would be the next level, the 6th level. The cases that went on appeal from the Châtelet to the Parliament, which had jurisdiction over more than a third of France. For the Parliament, there is an inventory of names and offenses, but as I found out during my last time in Paris, the inventory contains numerous mistakes. So the only way to find out what really happened is to go from the inventory to the registers of sentences. No small task. And then the top level would be the capital punishments, which are few in number, and I'll come back to those at the end. So what I'd like to talk about here and now is level 4, the cases that were heard by the Châtelet. Thus far, I've worked through about 300 cartons from the 1720s. You have to realize that these cartons are not indexed. There's no subject access. So you have to go in digitized form in Gallica or in microfilm or in manuscript on site at the Arsenal. You have to go through dossier by dossier looking for what you're looking for. There's not even a subject tag on the front of the dossier. You have to actually browse every single one in order to find these cases. In the 1720s, I found 4 cases. I'm currently working my way through 1730 to 35, which is another 200 cartons. I don't have the results of that yet. 2 of the 4 cases from the 1720s are rather sketchy and skimpy, so I'd like to say a few words about the other 2 cases for which we have more information. The first case involves Louis Manigon, a former guard in the service of the Duc d'Orléans. He was one of the guards in the Palais Royal, known to the police, quote, for a long time as a sodomite. This dossier includes both police observations and depositions by indignant Parisians. There are a couple of records where police observed Manigon in action trying to pick people up, and then more importantly, we have the documents from September 16th, 1724, when Manigon was arrested near the Porte Saint-Martin, 8:30 in the evening, after several locals complained that he was trying to debauch young folks. The complaint was made by a wine vendor and a master joiner from the neighborhood, and we have statements from 3 of the young folks that Manigon tried to debauch. The first is the son of the master joiner, who was about 16 years old. He said that Manigon had accosted him outside his father's shop, tried to shove his hand into his pants, and asked him if he had frequent corrections, which must mean erections. And the boy rebuffed him. The 2 other witnesses, I think, are older. One is a lapidary's assistant named Louis Lemoine. He accepted an invitation from Manigon to go to a tavern and have a drink, where Manigon fondled him, suggested sodomy to him. He agreed to meet Manigon again, made a rendezvous with him for later in the same day. The third witness was Jean Tourtet, a journeyman carpenter, presumably somewhat older, also from the neighborhood. He went off from the street to the wall surrounding the Protestant cemetery in the neighborhood, where Manigon fondled him and suggested sodomy as well. And at that point, the watch happened to go by, and the rest ensued. Now, the police routinely assumed in same-sex cases that it was predatory older males corrupting vulnerable younger males, even though their own records contain numerous examples that constitute exceptions to that rule of thumb. There are many, many cases in which younger males accepted drinks or meals or even money, or outright sold their sexual services to older males. Manigon may well fit the police model of the predatory older male, but I have my questions about the 3 younger males in this case, 2 of whom accepted invitations to go off and have drinks or meals with him. In any case, the watch, having arrested Manigon, sent for the Lieutenant General of Police, who came to the scene, who took some depositions, consulted his superiors, including the Duc de Bourbon, the principal minister, who considered the misconduct too clear-cut and too public not to be pursued. So the case went to the Châtelet. The verdict was further inquiry for a period of 1 year. In this case, he didn't serve the 1 year in prison. He was released, he was back on the street, and guess what? We have another series of police observations of him cruising in public places. To one young man, he suggested that Manigon would love him like a woman or wife, his femme, and maintain him, and so on for other cases. So by the end of this dossier, you have the police concluding that Manigault was the most infamous and the most dangerous sodomite there is for youngsters. But what happened to him in the end? After the expiration of the year or further inquiry, he was banished for 9 years, and the Crown exiled him 50 leagues from Paris. Case 2, Jean Moreau, 43, married, former member of the French Guards, expelled for unspecified misconduct, now a fruit vendor, an abominable type, and known as such for a long time. Both of these men have reputations. He supposedly lured a young boy into his shop and almost whipped him to death. And then on 27 September 1729, raped a young man, a paver's assistant named Nicolas Ambert, in the cellar of his shop. Moreau left the scene, and Ambert came out of the house, made a lot of noise, made the matter public, which provoked very considerable scandal among the neighbors. People took him to the local commissaire's residence where he gave his deposition. Moreau avoided the police for about 5 months, was finally arrested, tried by the Châtelet, sentence, further inquiry for 1 year. During that year, it's unclear what happened, unfortunately. Moreau says in a petition that he managed to convince the judges, that he never raped the young man. In any case, what happened after the first year of further inquiry was another year of further inquiry. And after that, he was released. The Lieutenant General of Police was not happy, wanted to keep him locked up, but Moreau ended the matter by enlisting in the Army, thereby escaping further prosecution. Now, the archives of the criminal chamber of the Châtelet, unfortunately, contain no documentation about these 2 cases or the other 2 that I didn't tell you anything about. Which leaves us with several questions. Number 1, why these 4 cases? Why did the Châtelet prosecute these 4 cases? You might start by thinking, well, it's because of the public clamor that Kate mentioned. We have public intervention in both of these cases, which is unusual, but the other 2, the ones I didn't tell you about, involve no public clamor at all. And I have lots of other cases of public clamor which didn't get prosecuted. So that would be much too simple. No such luck there. Second question, why did these 4 men, 2 of whom I've told you about, who did not display the same profile or behave in the same ways, why do they all end up with the same sentence, further inquiry, or maybe 2 times further inquiry? We have, in these cases at least, no documentation at all about the deliberations of the magistrates. So we can do nothing more than speculate that the judges subjected all 4 of them to the same further inquiry, not simply because they didn't have enough evidence and wanted more, but perhaps also because they, unlike their predecessors in the 17th century, did not think that these men deserved the statutory punishment, which was death by fire. These 4 cases came from below, from the archives of the Bastille, from the police records. I have 1 case that comes up from above, from the archives of the Parliament. And this is the only case for which I have complete documentation, from the arrest through the Châtelet, through the Parliament, and the final decision. This case began on March 26, 1741, involving a man named Jean-Pierre L'Écrivain. I recently realized that I had in my possession his original arrest record from 1724, 17 years early. I hadn't realized it before because he was listed on the cover as Jean-Pierre, without his last name. But there he is. So he also has a record like the other 2 men. He was arrested by the watch in the street in the night after 2 men observed him allegedly having sex with another man and told the watch that they were these 2 men having sex in the street. Go get them. So they did. The one man had fled, leaving just L'Écrivain, who was kind of stumbling around, half undressed, could not escape. In this case, unlike the other ones, I do have the interrogation. And what he said was that he had stopped to do his business in the street, and he stumbled and couldn't get up and was half undressed because he was having trouble getting his pants buttoned up again. And he said, besides, I have a wife and children. as if that in and of itself would mean that he wouldn't want to have sex with men, which is, of course, kind of interesting. The only other interesting thing about these lengthy interrogations and depositions is that the 4 members of the watch who performed the arrest and delivered him to the commissaire didn't tell exactly, entirely the same story. 2 of them said that the people who reported the sexual activity in the streets referred to the 2 men as wretches. And the other 2 said that the 2 men who reported the sex in the street said, these men deserve to be burned. Rather different versions of the story. In this case, as in Kate's, the police said, we need to talk to these 2 men who denounced the 2 men having sex. They must come forward. And of course they never did. Verdict, 3 years of further inquiry. L'Écrivain appealed the case to the Parliament, and the Parliament dismissed it because there was no reliable testimony. So it's interesting to me that the Châtelet and the Parliament did not treat sodomy cases as some sort of extraordinary, completely different cases that need to be handled in extreme ways without respect for the usual rules of procedure and evidence. On the contrary, they handled them in more or less the same way. To this, also, I think, they did not regard men who had sex with men as some sort of different creatures, which gets us into the whole question about identity and so on and so forth, much debated in 18th century France and elsewhere. My own feeling about this after many years of work is that Michel Rey vastly overstated the extent to which 18th century Parisian sodomites had a sense of different sexual identity and a sense of collective united community. We can talk about that some more if you like. In the end, the Parliament sentenced very few of these men to death. I have in my hand, and you have before it, you are the first people to see it in the flesh, a new and I hope definitive list of cases which will replace the old one by Claude Carew, which is full of mistakes and utterly unreliable. There's some question marks in here, as I said, because there are mistakes in the inventory and I couldn't find all the sentences. But in any case, the number of executions in the jurisdiction of the Parliament of Paris for sodomy in the 18th century is probably 6. And 3 of them involved other offenses, blasphemy, theft, attempted murder. So 3 and only 3 without extenuating circumstances. When I was last in Paris during the summer during the Gay Games, the online Advocate News reported the desecration of the plaque embedded in the pavement at number 67 Rue Montorgueil. The plaque that memorializes Jean Diot and Bruno Loire, who were arrested in the act in the street in the night and executed on 6 July 1750, the last execution in France, without extenuating circumstances. The report in the Advocate stated incorrectly, as I pointed out to them in a professorial communication, couldn't help myself, that the 2 men were burned alive and that homosexuality was legalized after the Revolution in 1791. Number 1, Diot and Loire were strangled before they were burned. I held the actual final interrogation with that note written in the margin in my hand just a few days before this report appeared. 2, same-sex relations between males, not homosexuality, were decriminalized, not legalized. 3, during, not after the Revolution in 1791. But, hasten to add, some types of same-sex relations, the types that preoccupied the police before 1789, involving public indecency and corruption of minors, were simultaneously recriminalized in the criminal codes. So, on the one hand, we should not exaggerate the savagery of persecution or the frequency of prosecution under the Ancien Régime. The magistrates processed few cases, not because they followed the philosophes, who did not speak with one modern voice on this subject, but because they knew they could not eliminate urban disorder, and because they feared the publicity might deter some, but inspire others to explore unknown sexual options. On the other hand, we should not exaggerate the modernity of the revolutionary legislatures, who disregarded traditional juridical principles, but not current police practices and enduring cultural prejudices. The limited implicit toleration before 1791 and the limited explicit toleration after 1791 should not be confused with liberty, which has taken much longer to secure and remains endangered right here and now and around the globe.